Good afternoon and welcome to this Real-World Evidence for Decisions webinar. It's my pleasure to be a co-moderator of this session this afternoon. My name is Karen Facey and I'm in the Secretariat of the Real-World Evidence for Decisions. I'm joined this afternoon by Dr. Matti Apro, who's medical oncologist at the Genolier Cancer Centre and past president of the European Cancer Organisations. I would ask for the slides to be put up now. Thank you very much. These slides, to begin with, show our housekeeping rules. The webinar will be recorded so that we can share it later on our website. Please do ask a question or make a comment using the Q&A function, and you can upvote the other people's questions that you like. And if you can rename yourself and add your affiliation, that tells us who you are. So going on to the next slide, we are Real-World Evidence for Decisions, a payer-led multi-stakeholder learning network. It was created by Joda Kopp, former CEO of the Belgian payer Inami Risiv, about 8 years ago, when he saw coming over the horizon some very exciting, highly innovative technologies, but that were getting expedited regulatory approval, which meant they had immature clinical evidence, but quite high prices. So therefore making the payers' decision-making challenging, as many uncertainties were remaining for these technologies. So he started asking questions, seeing that real-world data was increasingly available about whether this could be developed into robust enough real-world evidence to inform particularly HTA and payers' decision-making, thinking about how manufacturers might be informed about generation of good real-world evidence during development, about how it should be assessed by an HTA or a payer body, and then perhaps thinking about risk-sharing schemes and conditional payer requirements for generation of real-world evidence to see value in real-life settings. And he did this by bringing together a multi-stakeholder group in the days when we used to meet face-to-face, bringing about 30 people around a table from all different jurisdictions, including clinicians, patient foundations, regulators, analytical experts, academia, industry, with a range of HTA payer bodies across the EU and Europe. And the approach was to discuss real and practical issues and to learn by doing. And if we go to the next slide, you can see that the collaborative element of this was absolutely key and has created a steering group, which has been led by a range of people, including Yo, but many HTA bodies from the EU and Canada, payers, clinicians like Matti himself, academics, analytics experts, and most recently, Eric Sutherland has joined us, who is digital head of health policy at OECD and was responsible for helping develop the real-world evidence strategy in Canada. This work is supported by a range of pharmaceutical companies and UCOPE, who support the Secretariat, but it is the steering group that drives our work. And it is the steering group that said to us one of the key issues coming over the horizon in terms of real-world evidence is how it will be used under the new HTA regulation. And as part of this, we considered how we could build robust real-world evidence. So we looked backwards before looking forwards. And we looked back at the barriers that were stated by HTA and payer bodies about use of real-world evidence. And the key one is the one there in red, which is about particularly data quality and its availability for the use of specific questions related to treatment effectiveness. There are also methodological issues, and we really need to increase transparency to build trust. And all this we need to do in policy and partnership together to build robust real-world evidence. So we brought this work together in what we call the 4 pillars, and these really drive all of our work. And we've published on this in 2022. If we go on to the next slide. As I've said, our focus given to us by the steering group is to look at the implementation of the HTA regulation. We all know, I think, that the regulation was formally adopted by the Commission in 2021. We're in a period of implementation at the moment. And from 2025, January the 12th, the regulation will be enacted in member states and across the EU. And one of the first things we will see happening is joint clinical assessments for certain products. And it is cancer and advanced therapy medicinal products such as cell and gene therapies that will be the subject of these joint clinical assessments. So in our webinar series this year, we will be focusing on these two areas and considering how real-world evidence might be used. Today, we're going to be looking at the treatment of cancer. And I am absolutely delighted to welcome our keynote speaker and then a range of panelists from different disciplines to discuss whether we can use real-world evidence to develop and use highly innovative technologies, and whether these are really going to help us in the battle to beat cancer. So you can see an overview of our session today. There will be ample time for questions, so do contribute. And without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome Professor Christine Chaumienne, who is Professor of Cellular Biology at the University of Paris, and she's chair of the EU Cancer Commission. So welcome, Christine, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction. I'm also very happy to be part once again of this meeting on real-world evidence. It's something which is, of course, crucial and timely, and I will share with you the thoughts of the Cancer Mission Board, the challenges we have been facing, and some of the good actions that we have already been launching, which is in line with the sharing and the use of real-world evidence. So as you all know, I hope now, as you know, there has been two very important initiatives at the European Commission that have similar intervention areas. It started in September 2019 by the launching of the 5 Horizon Europe missions, of which one is cancer, and then rapidly followed by the new president, Ursula von der Leyen, who wanted to launch a new Europe's Beating Cancer plan at the European Commission, and that was launched at the end of the year. The Mission Board on Cancer, therefore, had the role of advising both the mission on cancer goals and criteria, and also to be able to feed into the Europe's Beating Cancer Plan program. We started off by, of course, following the very precise concept criteria for a mission. We have to have a very precise quantitative goal, which can be achieved in a specific dedicated time. So we aimed to, by 2030, have more than 3 million lives saved, living longer and better. To reach this precise goal, we have 5 intervention areas: prevent what is preventable, optimize diagnosis and treatment, support quality of life. This, of course, leans on a very solid soil. Understand, we wrote that we cannot improve efficiently what we do not understand. And of course, this has to be accessible to all EU citizens. This 5 intervention areas and this goal was implemented by 13 solid, bold recommendations that was provided in our report in September 2021. And I'm very happy now that all this has been launched rapidly and effectively by the European Commission. So these are the 13 recommendations, and I really wanted to go back, and even for me, it's interesting 2 or 3 years later to go back to these recommendations to see how much we have gathered with these recommendations. So we have one which is to understand the cancer uncanny you. And in the text, we have really, and I highlighted these little sentences which are in the recommendations, we really want to integrate innovative models, technologies, with longitudinal patient data and samples. For the recommendation on polygenic risk scores, we highlight whole genome sequencing EU database for the implementation of genomic and informatic infrastructures for data collection and dissemination. For cancer prevention strategies, we highlight the need to collect evidence of policy intervention. For screening programs, big data analysis and machine learning methods integrated in screening and early detection programs are needed to generate new insights. For personalized medicine, we highlight large-scale intersector EU collaboration and advanced data analysis. For early diagnostic and minimally invasive technology, we want to stress the importance of successful research that needs to be performed through a diagnostics tool by integrated and driven artificial intelligence, and all this leading to more cure and better quality of life. Oh dear, I'm stuck. For quality of life, collect data on health-related and social and legal needs, short and long-term toxicities. For the Cancer Patient Digital Center, I'll talk to you a bit later. For cancer health equity, availability, and optimal use of research and clinical data for all EU patients. For the network of comprehensive cancer infrastructures, we highlight the need of tumor boards to integrate data collection, data quality insurance, and data consolidation. For childhood cancers, adolescent and young adults, we stress the needs of cross-linkage of databases for understanding prevention of toxicities, efficacy of innovative therapies, health and survivorship passports. For innovation, we highlight the need of traditional and non-traditional innovators for digital science, and for transform cancer culture, communication, and capacity building, we stress lay language and national language dissemination of cancer data. So going back into 2019, you see that our recommendations and the text of our recommendations of all the 13 recommendations retrospectively highlighted the need of really leaning on data. And so this is also important because we did quite a numerous consultancy before we provided and published our recommendations of what was the citizens and the patients' feedback. The sentence came back: share data and knowledge, no waste, no fragmentation, and coherence. They really supported the European Cancer Patient Digital Center, and I'll come back to later. They ended also by saying there was support from their view for more personalized prevention based on assessment of individual risk based on big data. So coming back from these recommendations, I'm very happy and excited that these recommendations were taken up by Research and Innovation at the European Commission, and DG RTD launched the implementation plan of the 5 missions in September 2021. As you know, DG Santé launched the Europe's Beating Cancer Plan in February 2021, and we mustn't forget the very, very important work of the Becker Committee of the European Parliament, and the rapporteur gave its summary, its enormous work, in February of 2022. So these 2 programs are now working hand in hand, are being implemented rapidly. I won't highlight why cancer is a challenge and has been identified amongst the 5 challenges for the 5 missions by the European Commission. I won't highlight again the goal that I've already told you: improve the lives of more than 3 million people by 2030 through prevention, cure, increased quality of care for cancer patients, including their families, and all this in line with the Europe's Beating Cancer Plan. I remind you of our 4 mission objectives, which are delineated in 18 research and innovation priorities areas and 4 transversal priorities, including equity, innovation, childhood cancer, and personalized medicine. We have a budget and we have a dedicated governance. Concrete actions have already been launched, both for infrastructures and for dedicated calls for research projects. I will deal a bit more specifically in UnCan EU and the Patient Digital Center. So the platform UnCan EU is one of the first call which was answered through the work program on the missions on cancer. It's in the implementation plan, and this is the sentence of the implementation plan: establish the UnCan EU platform by 2013. It's a unique digital platform where researchers from all over the world share and have access to high quality data. Through dedicated funds for coordinated and support action, which has been launched in 2021, a blueprint for the UnCan EU platform will be developed in order to prepare a fully fledged sustainable platform managed by the member states, associate countries, and stakeholders. So in summary, just briefly, because it's really a huge consortium with multiple of stakeholders who are working to produce this blueprint in a very short time, it's going to be a federated data hub, a unique collection of cancer research data worldwide. You all know what this data is: patient images, biological data, patient-derived models also, patient model data also, lifestyle data, patient clinical data. You all know that all these types of data come from different places, whether it's research infrastructures, translational research structures, basic research, registries, comprehensive cancer infrastructures. And so the goal of the blueprint is to precisely link all these different data hubs, bring them all together so that they are able to answer the questions of the researchers and the patients to make a strong difference for cancer understanding. Then I'll finish a bit more in detail on our other action, which is the European Cancer Patient Digital Center. Once again, it's a house. We like having houses in our cancer mission. We see it as a house that belongs to the patient. It's a national portal for patients to access, deposit, and exchange their data. But it's also a portal where the patient can access information and where the patient can participate in research and care policy actions. The house is meant to be furnished depending on the patient, his or her cancer, and the place where the patient lives. So depending on all these characteristics, the rooms will be furnished differently, but the rooms will have specific functions. There will always be a bathroom, there will always be a living room, right? So some of these rooms, I'll highlight them to you, or refer to the recommendation that the mission board wrote. So three of these rooms are, you can see on the top right, is to access to clinical patient data. It's for the patient to have a health passport where he can have his own records and he can manage his disease when he wants in an ethical, standardized, interoperable manner. Another room is where the patient can find information on his cancer, the trials, the recommendations, and foster a long-term care. Another room is where the patient can find information and apps and tools where he can provide maybe what's important for you, some of his own lifestyle messages, his own prompts and his own reports that can be important for him, but also some help that he can find for physical, mental, diet, and whatever. And then the last room, and that's why we put it last. It's once all the other rooms are furnished and fulfill the expectations of the patient. Once all these data are in the house, then the patient, if he wishes, can share the data that he has in his house, in his portal, in his center, to participate in research, whether it's for understanding cancer or the impact on patients and survivors' lives, and to be able to participate in research with his data. And with this, I'll finish by a few, let's say, messages that I've had during all these past years working on this topic. So as you understand from the patients, it's really no waste. Use all available data from every stakeholder, including patients and citizens, and real world data is of course amongst these data available. Trust, I saw this also in your slide. Some patients and citizens prefer a governmental framework, but it's also important to have effective added value for all stakeholders, that at least the data that is collected, the data that is shared is really useful for everyone participating. And then the use, it's something which I found is complicated. There's a lot of data out, there's a lot of questions out, and sometimes there's frustration because the questions are not adapted to the data or the data is not adapted to the question. And so I saw one of your slides also, which I thought is important. It's good also to start doing something and then you learn by doing. What's also important, and it comes to your title about evidence and decisions, and I wrote the sentence because before I really looked at your title, all stakeholders should define the level of evidence that they need for the decision. And that also relates to the type of data that is necessary to answer the questions and to answer the decisions that need to be made. Of course, patients and citizens should participate with their decision, their data in the decision to make the answer adapted to their needs. And finally, of course, equity requires cross-border, cross-member state collaboration to be able to participate. And with this, I will end this talk and happy to participate in the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christine. It's remarkable that in a few minutes you are able to show a part of a huge amount of work that is going to help us in the future. And there is already a question in the chat. I invite everyone to put questions in the chat. We'll do our best to collect them and answer them during the question answer part of this particular meeting. So now it's my pleasure to be helping the continuation of the discussion after this introductory keynote speech by Professor Christine Chaumienne. We will have with us MEP Tomislav Sokol from Croatia, who is a co-rapporteur of the European Health Data Space, the European Parliament. He's right now at the parliamentary session in Strasbourg, so he will not be able to stay with us until the end. But we appreciate very much that he has taken time out of his parliamentary obligations to be with us. Tanya Podkonyak, who is director of UCAN Oncology Access Reimbursement Policy for a company called Takeda, is with us. Natasha Bolaños from the Lymphoma Coalition. She's the head of membership and alliances in this patient coalition. And we also have from the north of Europe, Emma Herlund, from the Swedish Dental and Pharmaceutical Benefits Agency, TLV. So without further ado, we would like to move forward in this discussion that should help us, all of us, to understand better how we can collaborate, because that's key. And I think this was already very nicely introduced. It's the collaboration within all stakeholders that will help us to go forward. And I do believe that Tomislav Sokol is with us. I don't see him. He's not here yet, so I will therefore skip.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Ah, you're right, Tomislav. Nice to have you with us. I was just told you are not. So you are here. Perfect. I see you there. So Tomislav, the question for you is, what are the implications of the European health data space for strengthening research and innovation in the cancer care, and how will it complement Europe's Beating Cancer Plan? So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I would first like to thank you for inviting me to this very important meeting on a very important, very timely topic, I would say. So as you know, the European Health Data Space Regulation has been proposed by the by the Commission. It's been almost a year now, actually, but this goes to show how complicated things are to be decided in the European institutions. But we are currently in the process of negotiating the Parliament's position on this. I think that that the health data space can really be a breakthrough. So it's one of those rare legislative files that we work on European level, which definitely can actually represent something completely new in the opposition to what the situation is now. And you know that in Europe's Beating Cancer plan, the creation of European health data space has been highlighted as one of the flagship initiatives that the Commission and the European Union will be working. So this is something which I think which is very important to mention, that this is definitely one of the European Union's priorities. When we speak about the health data space, we speak actually about two groups or two types of the data can be used for. First is the primary use of data, and second is the secondary use of data. So health data space regulation on primary use of data, that essentially means that patients will be able to access their medical files, the health data which is prescribed by the regulation, and they will be able to make it available also for healthcare professionals. So for instance, in cross-border setting, when you need to see a doctor, maybe you are studying in another member state, you are traveling, or for some other reason, or you have to go to a hospital from your primary care provider. So these healthcare providers will be able to access your health data which will make the diagnostics and treatment and everything else much faster and much easier. So that is the idea, that when you're for instance in another member state, you have to see a doctor. That doctor does not have to conduct all the diagnostic and make new images and whatever again, but they can base their decisions on the data that's already there, which is very important. Also, they will be able to access data, for instance, on your allergies or on certain medical products, for instance, etc. So this is the idea in the primary use. But when we speak of real-world evidence, I think secondary use is definitely more important. So the whole idea of secondary use is that large data sets gathered from all over Europe can be accessed for the purpose of research and innovation, and that is essential if we want to create new medicines, new drugs, new medical treatments, etc. But also for policy making and policy decisions as well. So how will the system work? So the whole idea of the system is that a certain institution which needs to access data for some of the stated purposes which are prescribed in the regulation will have to make a request to health data access body. There will be at least one health data access body in each member state, and then these health data access bodies will be deciding whether to grant this access or not. And of course, the access will be possible only for one of the prescribed uses of data, so it will not be able to access. It will not be possible for somebody to access data, for instance, for determining risk factors, calculating premiums for insurance and things like that, but only for very narrowly defined specific purposes like policy making, like research, innovation, etc. This access to this data will be done in secured environment. And what is important and what is prescribed in the regulation and in my report, in the first draft of the report, that only anonymized or pseudonymized data will be accessed. It will be possible to access anonymized, pseudonymized data, and it is explicitly prescribed. So what I put in my report is that it must be possible for those who are using the data to identify individual patients. So this will not be so it will not be possible to access data of individual patients, to use this data to identify those patients, but only large data sets which are important for research innovation or making policy decisions, etc. So by having all of these limitations, you're actually creating safety valves, safety instruments, so that the privacy and data of individual patients is protected. I think this is very important, that we will have a lot of these safety instruments and guarantees, which will make sure that patient's data is not accessed by somebody who will misuse this data, and that this data cannot be used for some purpose which is not in public interest. So this is how the system will work. Of course, the idea is that we will be able to access much more real-world data than we have been able to access now, and this can be very, very important for cancer research in the future. Of course, I would like to highlight the example of patients suffering from rare diseases. I think they will be the ones who will benefit probably the most out of these possibilities, because currently for individual rare diseases, in many cases, it's impossible to conduct phase 3 clinical trials when developing new medicines and medical technologies because there is just no, because there is not enough patients to conduct phase 3 clinical trials. So this is so definitely I think that the possibility to access these large data sets with all the safety instruments which have been prescribed will definitely create a real breakthrough and help conduct research in innovation, but also to make policy decisions in the area of healthcare, and especially when we speak about beating cancer. Of course, I was referring to rare diseases, but of course there are certain types of cancer which are also very rare, where there is not enough research being done on the European level, not enough collaborative research. And the whole idea is that with all of these data sets that will be available from Health Data Space, also these kinds of research and development of new medical products will become possible. This is especially important for smaller member states like mine, like Croatia, where for certain types of cancer we just don't have the expertise and not enough data that we can conduct real research. And by doing this, by having possibilities to access these large European data sets, it will be also easier for us to create some collaborative efforts, collaborative projects, and also to make it easier to conduct cancer research as well. What will be the crucial thing, I think, politically, when we speak about secondary use of data, is there is a lot of misunderstanding on part of some of my colleagues in the parliament on what these benefits are. Of course, data protection is important, privacy protection is important, but we should not lose sight of the main objective. And the main objective is to create new possibilities for research innovation in the area of healthcare, which can actually save lives. Because I know that some of my colleagues in the parliament are more focused on making some populistic statements and things like that, saying for instance that this data will be misused, that will be commercialized by the private sector, that we should think about the patients and not the industry and things like that. Of course, we have patients as our priority. So improving patient treatment, that's our main priority. But we understand we cannot do it without the industry. We understand that we cannot do without private sector developing new products. Of course, we also need the universities, research institutes, etc. So we need all of them to be able to access this data and create new medical technologies, new treatments, and new medicines for the future. So this is important. That secondary use of that possibilities to access all of this data for secondary purpose will actually lead to saving lives. This is important. I think not all of my colleagues are understanding, because I know that we have a lot of amendments which have been tabled to the first draft of my report, and a lot of these amendments really go too much into the direction of limiting possibilities to access data, and this is something which definitely is not good. So of course we should protect the patient's privacy and patient's data, but of course without introducing unnecessary obstacles to the use of data as such. The main political discussion will be about the patients taking part in the decision making on what happens with their data. So in the Commission's original proposal, there was no role for the patients in terms of making decisions whether their data can be used for secondary purpose or not. For that reason, I proposed in the first draft of my report a so-called opt-out mechanism. So the proposal is that those patients who do not want their data to be accessed for secondary use, for research, innovation, etc., can opt out of the system. So they can decide that their data will not be used for these purposes. And we think that this is definitely necessary. We have to give the opportunity to those patients who do not want to share their data, that they can make such a decision. However, this is as far as we are willing to go, because we believe that if we go for an opt-in mechanism, whereby patients will have to proactively decide to give their data, to allow their data to be shared for secondary use, we'll just not be able to get enough and representative data for it to be useful. So it is our position, and the experience from the member states which have introduced similar systems shows us that with opt-out system, we can have the balance between patients deciding that not to share their data, but also in the end having the final result of getting enough data that it is useful. But if we go for an opt-in mechanism, the experience shows us that we will just not be able to access enough data for this data to be useful. So this is why we will definitely insist on having an opt-out mechanism, and we will oppose having an opt-out mechanism, but we will oppose having an opt-in mechanism, because we believe that with an opt-in mechanism, we will just, the whole regulation, the whole health data space will become useless. On top of this, so what is important for us is funding. So we believe that we need to have additional funding from European level, from centralized level, in order to create the infrastructure for the health data space. So we will definitely insist very strongly on that, because we believe that this is something which is very important. And what is also very important is to actually invest enough money also into education and training of both healthcare professionals, but also on informing patients of all the benefits of secondary use, to make it easier for them to decide on being willing to share their data for secondary use. So we have to explain to the people, but also to the public, what all the benefits of the secondary use of data are, and how many lives can be saved by introducing this health data space and the possibility of secondary use of data. The current situation is that negotiations in the parliament have already started. I think we received around 2,000 amendments on the first draft of the report, which means that on one hand, that makes our job a bit more complicated, but it also shows us how important this topic is, that there is a lot of different positions, and we'll do our best to find a compromise in the end. It will not be easy, but this shows how relevant this topic is, how important it is, and I hope I believe that we will be able to reach the agreement within the parliament before summer, so that in September we can start negotiations with the council, with the member states, to actually have the final agreement by the end of this year. Because if we are not able to come to final agreement by the end of this year, then the next year is the election year, and I'm afraid that in that case the whole thing will be postponed for the next commission, the next parliament, and we don't want this. So we need to act fast. We need to be very concrete and precise on what we want to do. But it is also important to create as much public pressure on the policymakers, on the members of the European Parliament, and on the member states in the Council, that they are also willing to do whatever it takes that we have the final political agreement by the end of this year. And to do that, we have to really strengthen and inform the public about all of the benefits of health data space and importance of real-world evidence and secondary use of data for actually having better health outcomes than they are now. So, because a lot of people don't understand this, it's too complicated or too indirect. So we really have to do our utmost, and that means also organizing seminars like this to actually spread the word about how important this is, and that by doing this, by creating health data space, making it possible for data to be used for secondary purpose, and the possibility to use real world evidence, that we can actually save lives. And I think that is something that is very important, but it is important that it's done not just by us, as policymakers, but also by all the interested stakeholders.
Well, Tomislav, this is an impressive presentation, and I know the way you are talking to your colleagues and trying to convince them that we are here to help the patients and to look at the future in the European system. So thank you very much indeed. And we will continue now the discussion with presentations from different perspectives. And you alluded in your presentation to the importance of collaborating with industry. We should not forget that a lot, not all, but a lot of the innovation has come from industry and not from academia. And we have to work hand in hand, because at the end, they bring different elements, not only drugs, that help the patients. So therefore,
if I may just try to answer some questions that I see in the chat. I don't have time to answer everything, but just some points, if it is possible.
Go ahead.
On the quality of data. So that's a very important question. So some of the amendments which were introduced, and I plan to accept them, is that for clinical data, only medical professionals can enter the data into the system. So for clinical data, which is crucial, of course, we have to see what is the best way how to define it. But for clinical data, it will only be medical professionals who will be able to enter the data into the system. So this is my political position, and by doing this, we think that we will be able to ensure that the quality of most important data. Also, what is important is that we have prescribed categories of data which are to be fed in the system also. It will not be possible just to share everything, but it will be really precisely prescribed in the regulation on what categories of data can be fed into the system and in which way. So that's one thing. The second thing that I wanted to say is that about the timeline. So the timeline is something that will be discussed with the council and negotiated with the council. The Commission has proposed a very ambitious, I think not very realistic timeline. I know that the member states will want to prolong it for probably 10 years or something. We will try to find some middle ground. We know that the situation in the member states in terms of the infrastructure and development of existing systems is different. So there are member states that in some member states we have a very digitalized healthcare systems. In some member states not so. But we think that it is important that we have more time than is proposed by the Commission. But probably it will be shorter time that the member states and the Council will want. So we'll have to try to find some middle ground, but probably the ballpark for implementation will be 3 to 5 years or something like that. But it depends on the final political negotiations, first within the Parliament and then the member states. What is important is what we will want is to create an ecosystem in which we will not create completely new system from scratch, top-down approach, but to actually create a system with protocols which will be able to integrate the existing IT systems which are already there in some member states. So the idea is to create a system where different IT systems already in place in member states will be able to take part in, but it's important then to make sure they're interoperable. So this is the idea. So not to create everything from scratch, top down, but actually to create a framework in which the existing systems will be able to be incorporated and where they will be able to work and be interoperable. So this is the idea. But of course, on certain additional technical characteristics, we'll need to get some additional rules and additional technical specifications from the Commission. Also, the question of language is important. We know that we already have the already partly existing system has some possibilities of automatic translation of the data, but of course I think that this is not it's definitely far from perfect. So we will be having additional discussions with the Commission and see what will be the best way to actually translate the data in different languages, see what are the best possible solutions to do that. But there will be additional discussions on that. There are definitely imperfections in what we have now, and we will make sure that this is resolved in the future. But I cannot be more specific on that. But definitely, yes, one of the crucial things will be to make sure that the data can be read in all official languages of the EU. This will be one of the most important things in the implementation.
Anislav, I will have to stop you here, unfortunately, because we do have to take on the other presentations and continue the discussion. If you can stay with us, wonderful. If you have to join the Parliament, we fully understand, and we really appreciate that you are working in a direction which is very similar to the one that the group here is defending. And we look forward to further interaction in the future with you. And
thank you very much. I will have to leave because this is the plenary week, so we have the plenary session of the European Parliament. But again, thank you very much for inviting me. And if anybody has some other questions or comments or suggestions, please contact me and my office, and we'll do whatever we can to set up a meeting and answer all the questions that we can. Okay. Thank
you very much, Tomislav, once again.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye-bye. So MEP Sokol mentioned the importance of industry, and it's a good way to go towards Tanya Podgorniak, who is a representative of this huge entity called industry, and to ask her about some comments on what are the ways in the future, impressions about something that wasn't mentioned, which is precision medicine, but of course it's mentioned almost every day, even in the lay newspapers. So Tanya, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Matej, and thank you very much for inviting me to this really important discussion. So if we look at the pace of oncology development and development of innovation, it's speeding up, and it has been for some time, which is great for our patients, but it also means more uncertainty. We are seeing the emergence of many novel MOAs, advanced therapies such as cell and gene therapies, and an increase in precision medicine, which has small populations and has the same challenges that MEP Sokol described as rare cancers and rare diseases. So real-world evidence will not replace the need for us to have clinical trials, but it does offer opportunities to supplement this data from clinical trials and to bridge the gaps that are inherent to highly structured RCTs and the nature of which patients are eligible, how many patients were able to enroll in a study, and what's feasible. Real-world evidence is particularly going to be important for precision medicine, personalized medicine, and rare cancers, where we have smaller populations and thus a lot more uncertainty. But it's also going to be very important in situations where we have a large variability in standards of care across Europe, which results in a large number of comparators. So a few years ago, we commissioned a piece of work to look at the use of real-world evidence in NICE cancer appraisals from 2011 to 2018. And what we found was that 96% of cancer appraisals done in NICE with that period used real-world evidence to inform the final decision. 96%, that's a huge amount, and that's research that's 5 years old. The real-world evidence was used to inform health-related quality of life and patient-reported outcomes as the primary source, to inform costs, medical resource utilization, but also to inform historical controls. And this was used to address long-term uncertainty, to look at how well the clinical studies predicted what happened in real life. And it was really important to supplement data for comparators, especially for rare cancers. What this work showed us was that even 5 years ago, real-world evidence constituted a really important source of information to inform decision-making. And with the introduction of the EU HTA regulation, this will likely increase, and the importance and the role the real-world evidence plays, especially for oncology and ATMP appraisals that are set to start from 2025. To demonstrate how I see this going, a really good example is a project that FPA and IQVIA did jointly to look at two recent medicines that came through for non-small cell lung cancer and multiple myeloma. And what they did was simulate the United 21 proposed approach to scoping. And this found that there would be likely more than 10 relevant comparators for each of the two JCA case studies that we looked at. So it is highly unlikely that we would have direct evidence for all of the comparators and comparisons needed. So it's going to become increasingly more important for us to fully leverage the potential for real-world data to inform these JCA assessments and have an effective implementation of the regulation. But I talked about all the good things and the positives, but there are challenges with real-world evidence. It is complex, and as with any data source, understanding the utility and the limitations is really critical to proper application. the quality of data and source data that's been available historically, as well as the rigor required to generate robust real-world evidence, robust enough to incorporate into decision-making, has really been a challenge. In many situations, it's been companies commissioning independent research, which usually has a very small sample size, or will have quite a biased selection of which studies sites are included, and is highly costly and inefficient because every company does it separately. That's been a big challenge, accessing good quality data that's comprehensive and complete. But another challenge has been the development of methods to incorporate real-world evidence into existing clinical trial data sets, to incorporate them into comparative effectiveness analysis so that they can be used for regulatory and HTA submissions. We made some progress with these methods, but I think we still have a long way to go. I think overall, and reflecting from MEP Sokol's presentation, I'm optimistic by the opportunities that are being presented by the European health data space to improve our health digital infrastructure, to improve the quality of data, and most of all, the access to an anonymized data sources for secondary use, because I think this will go a long way to answering those gaps that we will have with clinical trials. Matty, you're on mute.
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you very much for these comments, and we will come back as time permits for some discussion about them. And I would now like to hear not only from those that speak of the patients, but from a real patient representative. So Natasha Bolaños, the floor is yours. Tell us, what is the perspective from the patients in this very interesting debate?
Well, I think that the patient, what really want is to have data that represents real world. So the place for real world is quite evident for patients and the representatives, because when you rely only on data that is coming from clinical trials, you take the risk not to count on the real setting, you know, how it looks to live not only with the disease under investigation or that needs to be treated, but with many other comorbidities that can course in parallel, and many other things that normally happen in a hospital every day that is not represented well in the clinical trial, because the clinical trial somehow controls everything that's going on. So the way the treatments work in clinical trials is not truly capturing the full complexity, you know, of the continuum of care. So considering that, I also want to add that clinical trials don't always report real life outcomes or provide that clear understanding of how it looks to live with a disease. Real world data has an important role to play, and that's why we need good partnership models to integrate patient groups and patients living with the diseases with the scientific community to guide on the interpretation and understanding on that data coming from real world, because it's not only to gather that data, it's how we learn from that data. And the current models not always translate into practice what we get from that data. So we are trying to see beyond. And in terms, for instance, of decision-making for health technology assessments, is relevant to consider the data that is capturing the quality of life and patient-reported outcomes, because that truly represents what is the impact in the well-being of the patients, and how, by controlling the symptoms of the disease, but also what the adverse effects that sometimes the treatment add to the course of the disease, how all these things impact the functioning of the patient, the capacity to have a full life. You know, at the end, it's about the societal benefit that we all get from treatments. And we need to integrate that in a better way to really capture the full spectrum, not only the clinical outcomes, but beyond. And I want to stress that especially umbrella patient organizations, European and pan-European umbrella patient groups, are investing quite a huge capacity and resources in generating real world evidence and translating the patient experience into data in a way that could guide the analysis, the interpretation of real world data, but also to be incorporated early in the design of research. And this should be part of the discussion about the unmet needs. What are the real unmet needs as perceived by the patients? Today we have, I'm afraid, many novel treatments. Many of them are coming to provide answers to real problems, but many are also coming just as a Me Too medicine. And I'm not telling that this is not good, but I'm telling that there are huge unmet needs that remain forgotten and neglected constantly. We cannot continue that way. If we don't focus the research in the learnings that the registries could provide through real world data, but also the hospitals, all the data that we are capturing today, all these wearables, the new systems to capture health data, the patient-generated health data, and you were discussing before about the secondary use of that data. What I'm more interested is not how to really, separate the data from patients that do not want or are not likely to share their data. But I would really try to understand why they do not want to share and would try to fix that, because I don't think that it's just because that you decide not to share. It's just because you don't trust how this is going to be used. But as soon as you understand, and in my conversations with patients, most of them are likely to be interested in sharing data as soon as they know that data is going to be used for improving opportunities for those who come behind. So those who come next, sorry. So I would really try to clarify what are the gaps, what are the concerns, and would try to provide answers to those concerns in a way that we could be really open that shared space is the only way to move forward. But this shouldn't be only to share data from patients for secondary use. This also should be a discussion on sharing data in general, clinicians with clinicians, registries with other registries, pharma companies with other pharma companies, regulatory bodies among themselves. So if we do not integrate everything and continue working in silos, I'm afraid we won't speed up as we need to improve outcomes. And I will leave it here because I'm conscious we have limited time.
Yes, we have limited time, but we have to listen to important words like yours. And I believe that we will have still a few minutes left at the end to come back to some comments. And before going into the general discussion, let's listen to another aspect, and that is the one representative of the bodies that allow the actual use of drugs that have been shown with the limitations of the registration system to be registered. And these are the HTA bodies. So Emma Herlund, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I would also like to start by thanking you and everyone for the opportunity to be here today. And thank you for all of these wonderful discussion points. I agree to all of them. So I actually think that from an HTA agency that takes the decisions on reimbursement, that we do have this very long-standing tradition of actually using real-world evidence for our decision-making. And it's more about assessing the quality of the data and the robustness of the analyses and taking that into account on a uncertainty level that impacts the decision, but not rejecting the evidence per se. So I think we are very open, and we want to have a lot of real world evidence, because there are a lot of things that go into the what you assess, the health economics for a decision on reimbursement, that are not in the trials. The randomized trials are the gold standard for effectiveness, but as has been mentioned here, there are a lot of other aspects on the implementation in clinical practice and the quality of life of patients that are not captured, perhaps always the best, or for a very limited time. Usually there's not data on quality of life once you progress, because you're not followed up after you progress, perhaps. And then you go to real world evidence. So it has a very long tradition of being used in health economics. And I think that's a good point. What is new, or newer at least, is perhaps the evaluation of effectiveness, or the quantification of effectiveness on the outcomes, where you have a single arm trial, and then you have to connect that to something, because you always measure the difference to something. So that's a little bit new, and I think that puts higher demands on data and on the analysis, on the planning, the execution, and above all on the transparency of what has been done, to review, which is our role is to review what evidence has been presented to us, because the industry prepares the evidence and shares with us, and then we review. I think transparency is key, and that kind of peer review, sharing what we think, what other agencies think, maybe even code sharing. I think the move towards more openness and more data sharing, but code sharing as well, to be very transparent with what is done, and to allow us to estimate that uncertainty in the decision. How has the data been handled? What bias assessments have been performed? A lot of sensitivity analysis, scenario analysis. All of that allows us to take better decisions. It also puts quite a high demand on time and competency on the agencies. And I think that these kind of common data initiatives are very important also for that, because a key aspect is knowing your data. It saves a lot of time and a lot of effort in everyone knowing the data that we are discussing. That's short, but a point of view from the HTA agencies.
Well, thank you very much, Emma. This is a very important perspective. And of course, we know that there are now ongoing discussions on how to implement the joint evaluation within Europe, and whether that will be then really taken up or not, and so on. And this is not the topic of the day, but we know this background, and it's not simple at all. So we had a very nice introduction and discussion with some comments of Tomislav Sokol on superb questions that came through the Q&A. We'll see what else we have. But I would like to go back to our first speaker, our keynote speaker, Professor Christine Chaumienne. Having heard all of this, and from your perspective, would you share a couple of reactions?
I find that the most important for us in our decisions is to focus on what the patient and the citizens want and need. It really gives a way to move forward and to focus our attention. It gives us also legitimacy. And so I think it's the main, point that we need to convey, and it's very often the last one. So we should start by that. The other thing that comes also to my mind, which is crucial, we have to respect, of course, the citizens' wish and mistrust to give out his data or her data, right? Patients is different. Citizens are more careful, which is logic. But if you reflect on the donations that our citizens do effectively for blood, for tissue organs, it's citizens who regularly donate their blood, and we live on that, and it saves lives. And so I think it was MEP Sokol who said that, to make people understand that sharing the data is going to save lives. Giving your blood, giving your bone marrow, giving your tissues, say you want to give it, is also saving life, and citizens are happy to do it. If I continue into this idea, and I'll stop there, it also leads to me to the difficulty of, and MEP Sokol said that, of giving the possibility of opting out. It's also the possibility of literacy of citizens who would not understand what they would need or what they would participate in giving their data. But then we run the risk of not being comprehensive. We run the risk of only having a specific type of data which coincides with a specific profile of citizens or patients, right? And so it's the same thing for blood donation. You know that your blood is of a specific, very rare subtype. And that's when the health authorities come back to you saying, we do need your blood because it's very rare, right? So sometimes we would be able to maybe reach out when we have gaps in the comprehensiveness of the data, that if we find that we're missing some crucial data from a specific type of cancer, a specific region in the middle of France, I don't know, that maybe it's important to be a bit more proactive and explain to the people why they need to donate. And I'll stop that.
Well, Christine, I think that relating this hesitancy of some citizens to the non-hesitancy of, fortunately, many others to donate, and it's not donating data, which in my simple eyes is relatively simple, but as a past blood donor, sometimes I was trepidant with the idea, oh God, again, this big needle in my arm. But I did it, as many others have done and continue to do. So indeed, there are some discussions there. We have a very nice comment in the Q&A, which is a reference to a website called datasaveslives.eu by Erwin Brunnings. He put this on the Q&A, so I attract your attention to this source of information. And I would like to ask one question which comes from the Q&As and which is related to public-private partnerships. This is a question from Trina Bank. Maybe there could be a reaction from Tanya on this question. What is going on about these private partnerships? It's actually not new, but how does this work? Tanya, we don't hear you.
Sorry, I had minimized the screen by accident. I think the question was more related to the European health data space, but I can speak from other experience we've had with public-private partnerships. There's real opportunity in having a multi-stakeholder approach to collecting data. So partnering with academic institutions, partnering with clinical research organizations that have access to data, also looking at instances where there's been data that's been commissioned from agencies like IQVIA or agencies that do chart audits, and sharing this to integrate into larger data sets that would enable us to have a more comprehensive data set and get better insights. So I think if we could look at and share the information that we do have from individual projects, that will go a long way to completing and adding a comprehensive data analysis. I think a really good example of that is one of the projects that Darwin EU recently did. on rare cancers, looking at the epidemiology. If you look at the data sets that were incorporated into that assessment, there was a large number of data coming from academic institutions and healthcare systems, but also from independent research organizations. And I think it's a great example of how combining and consolidating data from multiple different sources, some private, some public, can really help us to come with a clearer, more comprehensive picture of answering a research question.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions you, all panelists, would like to ask, or should we ask Karen, who has told me that she does have something that she would like to share as a question? Don't see a hand raised. Everyone is happy to listen to Karen. Karen, please go ahead.
I was just going to reflect, Matti, really picking up on that question of partnership. I heard Tanya say that it's highly costly to develop a good real-world evidence package, and it's actually inefficient if every company is doing it on their own. And where we look to at the moment is external comparator arms. We're looking for a good natural history data set that is telling us what the best standard of care could be to allow that evaluation of comparative effectiveness that Emma talked about. So I'm wondering if we can do things differently. How can we not just think about public-private partnerships, but encourage industry to work in a disease area to generate the latest area, and perhaps that's working with clinicians. And talking to Emma, you picked up there about the need for more transparencies from the HTA bodies, I think, about sharing code. I think that was you, or was that sharing? I think
for everyone, actually, that you also submit your code for your studies, perhaps, upon request at least, but the kind of general, I think that's, I'm a bit older now, but I think there has been a lot of like siloed, you do your research and it's never reviewed to that sense. But I think there's a trend that I really love, and it's a bit frightening to be more sharing with everything that you do. You share your data, you share codes. And I think to build on that youthful, in a way, instinct, that maybe a change of view that everyone is responsible to handle data and analysis in the best way. But I would also like to perhaps bring up an option, because we talked a little about decisions or evidence that come before your submission, and the uncertainty around that. But I think there could also be more use of collaborations between both data holders, academia, and companies, and decision-making agencies on the follow-up of these decisions, because they are very uncertain at the time of decision. But once the new treatments are implemented into clinical practice, there's a whole new opportunity to follow up on that decision. And that, I think, could and should be made in a collaborative way.
Absolutely. And that issue of post-launch evidence generation and HTA bodies being able to access their own data, align it with other member states, is a key area. And I'll ask the Secretariat to post our report on that into the chat. But I can see that Tanya and Natasha have taken my challenge there to think about partnership. So perhaps I'll turn to Natasha first and then Tanya.
Yes, I just would like, I know that we are focused today in cancer, but I think there are important learnings we should take from the pandemic, because that was a very unique moment where suddenly everybody from all over the world, realized how important it was to share as a way to speed forward and as a way to find the right solution and the right knowledge to design research, to provide treatments, to find a way, to learn. And we shouldn't forget that experience. I mean, we should be taking in a very serious way and incorporating those learnings, those best practices as the only way to move forward, the only one. So this should be put even in regulatory, even if transformed into kind of law. I think there are very good experience from partnerships, public-private partnerships, and I fully agree. That's what we do in the patient representative space. We try to share absolutely everything we do because we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We just need to learn from others, what they do well, what have been even the failures as a way to save time and to save effort. The resources are limited. Time is pretty limited when it comes to treat diseases. So yes, I think that we all have that responsibility, to put the pandemic learnings as the only way to move forward.
Great, thank you. Tanya.
Yeah, and I was reflecting on your comment about efficiencies and how we can collaborate together. I think there's a real responsibility and a need to improve probably publications of data that's collected and follow publication standards. I also think that there's a need to have more guidance on data collection, analysis, reporting standards, really critical to increase that transparency. We saw something coming out of NICE, the real world evidence framework last year in 2022 that had one of the sort of earliest examples of putting forward what's needed, how should it be reported, how should it be analyzed, which is a comment that Emma made as well. And I think I would be very happy and encouraged if I saw this expanded from other HTA agencies also on this side of the English channel to see what's really expected. But I really think it comes down to access to high quality source of data. So the data that's commissioned independently, whether it's a chart audit from certain sites or certain countries or whatever it is, if that can be integrated back into a collective area like the European health data space, I think that's really the true answer versus individual companies approaching other companies and so on and so forth. If there's an integrated place where this can be collected and analyzed and synthesized together, that would be, and a place that everybody can go to versus commissioning independent projects. That I think is the answer, and I'm hopeful that eventually with the European health data space we will get there. If we have good comprehensive registry data, that why not use that? And I look to Emma and what the Nordics are able to achieve with historical longitudinal data. It's quite impressive, and I hope that we can get there across Europe in the future.
That's great. Thanks, Tanya. And I'm going to pick up from that and I'll hand back to Matti. One of the questions in the Q&A box is about use of PROs. And I've heard Natasha say you don't use enough quality of life, whereas I know for any HTA agency that is doing economic modeling, actually a quality adjusted life year is key to their decision making. And actually those data are often where we have the biggest uncertainties. So how can we resolve this issue of bringing in the outcomes that really matter to patients and making sure that we have sufficient data over the longer term to kind of really tell us what the impact of a new treatment is? Anybody got any ideas on that? Emma, that's probably a kind of modeling question, so I wonder if you want to contribute first.
It is tricky by nature, I think, to have this very long-term knowledge before launch. So yeah, you have to look to history on what you're comparing against. But there could be improvements absolutely in this area. But I think that's just so for long-term, maybe there are long-term side effects that you don't see by the trial. And if you're a survivor, things will impact your life in a way that you don't know at the time of trial. So we have to kind of by scenario, what if this happens? How will it impact? And then maybe look at that specifically. And our resources are also limited jointly, I think, that we cannot look at everything that we would want to, but I think for quality of life, where there is data and you have to connect it to use it, there has to be some other information as well. that it's connected to, in some way, to a health state, if you had this treatment, or some explanatory variables to explain why you are, that describes your health state.
I see that Christine has raised her hand.
Well, I just wanted to continue that, of course, as Erwin put on the chat, of course, EMA with Darwin is launching a very good, let's say, stakeholder collection of real-world data for, of course, the benefit of the patient and analyzing long-term side effects. For the Beating Cancer Plan and the Cancer Mission, this is what we hope the European Cancer Patient Digital Center could help in doing, by collecting data from the patient during his life, when he wants or when she wants. The only difficulty is to be able to combine two sets of data, which are linked to a specific harmonized, standardized questionnaire, so that, of course, you know how to analyze the data of everybody at the same time and get a fruitful answer. And that's why we launched a call, which was to identify new needs, so that new types of questionnaire could be more adapted to reported outcomes. And then there's the artificial intelligence technology to be able to do data mining from just, people who write a diary, or who say what they want, so that at least some common, let's say, information can come out when they are analyzed. So yes, we hope that one of the rooms of the House of the Cancer Patient Digital Center should be able to collect the reported outcomes.
And Natasha.
Yes, I just want to add, it's not a solution. I want to raise one of the barriers, actually. And this is that when regulatory bodies, HTA bodies, only rely on validated tools, we are taking the risk of not truly getting the data we need, because the current tools we are using were designed, most of them were designed like 20 years ago. They were not disease specific, and they are not representative of the course of the disease, the courses today with the current treatments, with the current clinical practice. So we really need to speed up the way we validate new tools. And in parallel, as we do that, we cannot, currently you need like 7 years for the validation of new tools. That's too much. By the time you validate that, it's already old. So this is a never-ending barrier. However, I mentioned before that the European and pan-European umbrella patient organizations, many of them are collecting data, are translating the patient experience into data, are capable to raise the top 10 medical issues, the top 10 physical issues coming from the different treatments, coming from the length, of the disease after several relapses, because it's not true that you can isolate what is really determined by the last treatment or the current treatment of the patient. The patient has been accumulating adverse events and symptoms from the long course of the disease, and we cannot miss that. So we really need to understand, especially in relapse and refractory settings, how is the real world, and that's, I'm afraid, is not truly captured. And that's why, again, we need to work together to ensure that we are paying attention to the real meaningful outcomes. And that's why we need also registries to capture that data. I'm afraid that most of the registries do not capture well quality of life. They capture mainly clinical outcomes. And we don't have registries everywhere. Many of them do not report, do not share. They do not capture the same. So it's even impossible to create standards, because what is collected here is not collected there. not even in Europe. And I also want to raise that when we talk about Europe, I'm afraid we are talking about member states. And we learn through the Ukrainian emergency that continuity of care can be really compromised when you start moving people from one place to another. So I really would like to see beyond our borders and to understand how other countries, how other regions can impact also the way we deliver care.
I think that your last words certainly shared by all of us and everyone that is listening to this conversation, but we are nearing the end. Just a word from a clinician. There were a couple of comments on the chat that clinicians don't like to do this and clinicians don't do that. Well, a few years ago, under the leadership of the big international group that deals with breast cancer studies, there was a very simple way to convince clinicians that they should fill in the quality of life questionnaires, which were felt by big as being an important part of the clinical research. And this was 20 years ago, not today, where it should be a standard, and unfortunately is not. And the simple answer is sadly very, very simple. The clinicians, i.e. their institution, did not receive full payment for the protocol unless the quality of life data had been filled in according to requirements of the study. I can tell you that when this was introduced, the percentage of missing data went from a very big number to a very small number. It's sad to say, but as in a song in a famous musical, money makes the life go around. So, last comment from all of you. We are in a setting in which we have been discussing real-world evidence, the impact that it has or it should have, and how it should have it. So the question is, after all of this, what is the potential of real-world evidence to help beat cancer with highly innovative medicines? 30 seconds each. Let's start with Christine Chaumienne.
What I think is important, and it's part of the mission concept, is that everybody has to be around the table at the same time from the beginning. So if you want to have real-world evidence to make decisions, you have to have the deciders with the ones who have the data together around the table. And this means whether it's public, whether it's private, whether it's researchers, whether it's HTAs, healthcare professionals, EMA, everybody has to be around the table at the same time. Otherwise, we lose time in explaining 10 years later the data, and the data that is collected may not, as I've shown in my last slide, be adapted to what HTA, insurers, of health authorities, researchers, or patients want. So we need to be around the table at the same time so that we know exactly what we're doing and what we are collecting for which questions.
So let's turn to Tanya.
Thank you, Matti. I agree with Christine and believe that high quality real world evidence can really provide further insights into treatment effectiveness. And it's going to become even more important as we implement the EU HTA regulation and have our JCAs with multiple comparators. I am encouraged by everything that we've heard today and all of the wonderful initiatives in the EU, but believe that we have to continue to work together across different stakeholder groups to improve the quality of the data, improve access to data, and improve methods to effectively incorporate real-world evidence into decision-making to accelerate access to innovation.
Emma, you were just alluded to HTA.
Yes, thank you. I agree. I think that this is in the end what everyone is after, to have a real world good outcome to a cost that doesn't take away from everything else. I think we will collaborate on this. We have our different perspectives and risk assessments, but collaboration is the way forward.
And the most important word, of course, comes from Natasha, representing the patient community.
Thank you. I subscribe everything that has been said, but I would add that real-world data should include patient preferences, patient outcomes. And I recommend to integrate, to aggregate this data with additional real-world sources as patient-generated data, patient organization registries, patient organization research on the patient experience. And totally agree, cooperation rather than competition.
So thank you very much to all of you. These would have been my concluding remarks, and you'd make my life so much easier. So the last slide is up here, is what is going to happen in the future with RWE4Decisions, besides all the work we do in the background. You are all invited to be with us on October the 10th to discuss about what we are doing in the field of advanced therapeutics, ATMPs. And then we will have a meeting live in Brussels on the 23rd of November. So with this, I would like to thank you all, thank the audience for the wonderful interaction in the Q&A, and please get back to us very soon. All of this recording will be made available on the website. And if you need any further information, please contact the Secretariat. Thank you all. Have a nice end of the day.
Thank you all very much. Very interesting meeting.
Thank you.